Reform UK poised to help Labour in Scotland, anything's better than the SNP. Reform UK, the political party positioned as an alternative to mainstream parties, is reportedly set to play an unexpected role in Scotland's political landscape by potentially aiding Labour's resurgence. As discontent with the Scottish National Party, SNP, continues to grow, many voters appear ready to consider alternatives, even if it means supporting a unionist party like Labour through Reform UK's influence. The sentiment driving this shift reflects widespread dissatisfaction with the SNP's handling of governance issues, particularly amid accusations of mismanagement and a lack of focus on key public concerns. Reform UK has capitalised on this disillusionment, appealing to those seeking change but wary of fully endorsing Labour or the Conservatives. One Reform UK supporter summarised the prevailing mood: anything's better than the SNP at this point. This perspective underscores the frustration among voters who feel that the SNP's prolonged dominance in Scottish politics has led to stagnation and missed opportunities. Labour, eyeing a revival in Scotland, stands to benefit indirectly from Reform UK's presence. By attracting disillusioned unionist voters who might otherwise stay home or split the vote, Reform UK could weaken the SNP's grip on key constituencies. This dynamic creates a potential pathway for Labour to reclaim seats lost during the SNP's rise to prominence. The unexpected alignment between Reform UK's strategy and Labour's ambitions highlights the fluidity of Scotland's political landscape. With general elections on the horizon, the interplay between parties and voter sentiment could lead to significant shifts in power, challenging the SNP's long-held dominance and reshaping the future of Scottish politics. Reform UK's role in Scottish politics, an unlikely boost for Labour amid rising anti-SNP sentiment. Reform UK, often viewed as a fringe party focused on challenging the status quo of British politics, is unexpectedly emerging as a potentially significant player in Scotland's political arena. This development comes as voter dissatisfaction with the Scottish National Party, SNP, reaches new heights, creating a political environment ripe for change. While Reform UK's primary agenda emphasises economic reform, democratic accountability, and a departure from perceived bureaucratic stagnation, its growing influence in Scotland could inadvertently benefit Labour. This dynamic has sparked interest and debate across the political spectrum. The rise of Reform UK and its appeal to disillusioned voters, initially formed as the Brexit Party under Nigel Farage, Reform UK rebranded to broaden its appeal post-Brexit. While the party has struggled to gain significant traction in Westminster elections, its messaging around fiscal responsibility, streamlined governance, and opposition to wasteful policies has found resonance among a segment of Scottish voters increasingly frustrated with the SNP. For these voters, Reform UK represents a no-nonsense alternative to traditional political players. Disillusionment with the SNP stems from various factors. Critics argue that after years in power, the SNP has failed to deliver on key promises, particularly in areas such as healthcare, education, and infrastructure. High-profile controversies, including internal party divisions and questions about financial transparency, have further eroded trust. At the same time, SNP leader Humza Yousaf has struggled to galvanise the base in the same way his predecessor, Nicola Sturgeon, did during her tenure. As a result, many voters, including former SNP supporters, are now exploring alternatives. For some, Reform UK provides a vehicle to express their dissatisfaction. While the party's policy platform differs significantly from Labour's or the SNP's, it taps into a shared frustration with political inertia and a desire for systemic change. Reform UK's focus on defending the Union also makes it an attractive choice for voters who oppose Scottish independence but remain critical of the Conservative Party. Labour's strategic opportunity in Scotland. Labour, historically a dominant force in Scottish politics, saw its influence wane dramatically after the 2014 independence referendum. The SNP's promise of a progressive, Scotland First agenda attracted swathes of former Labour voters, relegating the party to a marginal role north of the border. However, as cracks in the SNP's foundation become more apparent, Labour is positioned for a potential resurgence. Reform UK's growing presence in Scotland plays an interesting role in this equation. By drawing support away from the SNP or disaffected unionist voters who might otherwise abstain, Reform UK indirectly bolsters Labour's chances in key constituencies. In first-past-the-post elections, where small shifts in voter behaviour can determine outcomes, this dynamic could prove pivotal. For example, in constituencies where the SNP won by narrow margins over Labour, even a modest swing facilitated by Reform UK's presence could tip the balance. Reform UK is unlikely to win many seats outright, but its impact on the overall voter landscape could help Labour claw back seats that were previously considered out of reach. Anything's better than the SNP, a growing sentiment. Among those disillusioned with the SNP, a common refrain has emerged: anything's better than the SNP. This sentiment reflects not just frustration with specific policies, but a broader fatigue with the party's long tenure in power. Critics accuse the SNP of prioritizing independence above all else, often at the expense of addressing pressing domestic. For voters who feel alienated by the SNP's focus on independence or disheartened by its governance record, Reform UK offers an outlet for protest. However, the party's broader policy positions, such as its emphasis on reducing taxes and limiting state intervention, may not align with the priorities of many Scottish voters, particularly those on the left. This creates a situation where Reform UK might attract votes primarily as a means of weakening the SNP, rather than out of strong support for its platform. The role of the Conservatives and Unionist dynamics. The Scottish Conservatives, traditionally the primary Unionist counterweight to the SNP, also stand to lose ground due to Reform UK's rise. With many Unionist voters now considering alternatives, the Conservatives face the challenge of retaining their base while also appealing to those dissatisfied with the SNP. Reform UK's presence complicates this task, potentially splitting the Unionist vote in critical areas. This dynamic could create a paradoxical outcome where Reform UK undermines both the SNP and the Conservatives, thereby strengthening Labour's position. As the only major party capable of mounting a nationwide challenge to the SNP, Labour could emerge as the primary beneficiary of this fragmented Unionist landscape. Implications for Scottish independence. The interplay between Reform UK, Labour, and the SNP carries significant implications for the future of Scottish independence. The SNP has long framed its dominance as a mandate for independence, even in the absence of a formal referendum. However, if the party's support continues to erode, its ability to claim this mandate will weaken. Labour's potential resurgence adds another layer of complexity. Historically, Labour has opposed Scottish independence while advocating for increased devolution. A stronger Labour presence in Scotland could shift the narrative away from independence and toward a focus on domestic governance issues. Reform UK's Unionist. The upcoming general election will serve as a critical test for all parties involved. For the SNP, it represents an opportunity to reaffirm its dominance or risk losing ground amid growing discontent. Labour, under Keir Starmer's leadership, will aim to rebuild its Scottish base and position itself as a credible alternative to the SNP. Meanwhile, Reform UK will seek to establish itself as a viable player in Scottish politics, even if its primary impact lies in influencing the broader political landscape rather than winning seats. The election results will likely hinge on voter turnout and the distribution of Unionist and Nationalist support. If Reform UK can attract a significant portion of disillusioned SNP voters or disaffected Unionists, it could reshape the electoral map in ways that benefit Labour. Conversely, if the SNP manages to consolidate its base and counter the narrative of stagnation, it may yet retain its dominant position. Reform UK's emergence as a factor in Scottish politics highlights the fluidity and unpredictability of the current political climate. While the party's direct impact may be limited in terms of seat counts, its influence on voter behaviour could have far-reaching consequences. For Labour, this represents a rare and valuable opportunity to regain relevance in Scotland after years in the political wilderness. For the SNP, it underscores the growing challenges of maintaining its dominance amid rising dissatisfaction. As voters prepare to head to the polls, the interplay between these forces will shape not only the outcome of the election but also the future direction of Scottish politics.